And I was just meeting with a few people before, and my view of the world is not that there are really big things happening in the world and we should learn about them because it's interesting. My view of the world is that there are really big, important things happening in the world, and we should learn about them because if we want to build the kind of future that we can imagine inhabiting, the kind of future that we would like to leave to our children and grandchildren, each of us has a sacred responsibility to do our bit. So I hope that my remarks tonight are interesting, but my aspiration is to help us all think together about some really big fundamental things that are happening, and some really exciting possible futures, and some really terrifying possible futures. And I wish there are certain people in the world, and I know some of them, who are technology optimists or techno-utopianists who will just say, let's just get out of the way. This technology is so exciting. All we need to do is just let AI be AI, and let's get out of the way. We don't need governance. We don't need regulation. Let's just let the technology go. And I guarantee you that will lead to absolute and utter disaster for all of us. And there are other people, the doomers, who say all of this technology stuff is so terrible, we need to pull the plug now so that these, whatever it is, AI killer robots don't come and kill us. It may be a great idea, but unfortunately, there is no plug. There is no plug to pull, so we can't. And so the name of the game is, how do we come together to discuss what's happening, what's at stake, and what is each of our responsibility to try to move our world. And our world may be just a few people in our household. It may be in our community here at Vail. It may be in our state. Whatever it is, everybody is living in a different reality. But we all have a responsibility. So I talked about this moment of change. And there are different ways of articulating the significance of this moment. But for me, at least the way that I articulate it, it's this: that after about 3.8 billion years of life on Earth, our one species, among the billions that it's ever lived, suddenly has the increasing ability to engineer novel intelligence and to re-engineer life. To engineer novel intelligence and to re-engineer life. And the question that will, in many ways, determine not just the future of us as individuals, not just the future of humans, but the future of life on Earth, is whether we can learn to use these godlike superpowers wisely. If we do, as I'll talk about today, we stand to have incredible rewards. And we can do so many things to make not just ourselves healthier and better, but to make a healthier, safer, more sustainable world for us and for all of life. And if we get it wrong, the negative consequences could be as terrible as the positive consequences that we can imagine. So that's why I believe we are all here together. That is the work. And so it was just mentioned, my new book just came out, Superconvergence, and if you'd like to read it, I hope you will, and you can get it there. I think it's in the library, but I write books in order to be read, so if somebody else has it, please borrow it from them or steal it from them. Years ago, I was speaking on this super luxury cruise, which I do once a year, and I said, I write books to be read. I don't do it for any financial motivation. And they have books in the shop. And so if you want to read my book, and the only thing that's getting in your way is the cost of the book, please just go to the shop and charge it to my room. I'm in room X. And I just figure these people were paying $20,000 to be on this cruise. I couldn't finish my talk. There was a stampede out the door. And the people who had purchased the book the day before, they called and complained and demanded a refund. But I certainly hope you will read my book. But when I talk about these big ideas, AI, genetics, biotechnology, for many of us, they can just seem like big abstract ideas. Like you say the word AI, it's hard to get a sense of where do I fit in the AI story. I mean, most of us are just trying to figure out what the story is, let alone saying, well, where do I fit inside of that story? And so for me, I'd like to start by making this story very concrete by bringing into my story these two very special people, my parents who are right here. These are my parents. So this is my mother, who's right over there. When she was a teenager, I grew up in Queens, in New York, and was a speech pathologist in New York, where she met this guy in the middle, actually soon after this photograph was taken, when he'd graduated from medical school. And my father, Kurt, who's right there, he and his family, you'll understand why I'm giving you this background. He and his family had escaped from Austria to Switzerland in 1938 and were displaced persons in Switzerland for 10 years and came to America as refugees in 1948 after the war. And there were two things that you did when you came as a person from a little village in Austria who didn't speak a word of English, who'd come through this incredible trauma. There are two things that you did when you show up in Kansas City to become an American. The first thing is you learn fluent English as quickly as you possibly can. And the second thing is you become a fanatical sports fan of the team of the city in which you have landed. And so my father became a fanatical, and again, you'll see why this in a little bit, why this is important. He became a fanatical Kansas City sports fan. And then when the Kansas City Chiefs came to Kansas City in 1959, 1960, I don't know what the word beyond fanatical is, but he was a beyond fanatical sports fan. So he graduated from medical school, went to New York, where he met my mother, brought her back to the Paris of the Plains, where they made great friends like Lynn and Andy, who are right here, and others in the room. And that's where I grew up. And 3 years ago, my parents, after my father had retired, and my mother, who's still working as a psychoanalyst, decided to move to Denver to be closer to my youngest brother, Josh, and his family. And it was this great story, and it was really kind of a victory lap after a wonderful life. And then we got some news. So I know we have people here. Raise your hand if you're from Kansas City, in addition to those four. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, 5. So the people who aren't from Kansas City don't know about Kansas City hand gestures. So if you come to Kansas City, when you see somebody doing this, what they're trying to say is, welcome to Kansas City. I love you. Have a nice day. So this is my dad, and just so it's not too shocking, he's sitting right there and he's doing great. But this is my dad 2.5 years ago when he got his diagnosis for stage 4 metastatic neuroendocrine cancer. You may not have heard of neuroendocrine cancer, but you have heard of Steve Jobs. This is the cancer that Steve Jobs had. And Steve Jobs decided that he was going to treat his cancer with these homeopathic treatments of smoothies and massages and all of those kinds of things. When my dad's diagnosis happened, I was writing the healthcare chapter of this book. And I live in the world of the future of healthcare, and I was writing and thinking a lot about the future of oncology. And I said to my dad, I said, well, here's the options. A lot of people, you've lived a wonderful life. You don't have to get treated at all. Or you can say, you tell me how much treatment you want. And my father said, give me everything, fight to the end. And so my view was, rather than live in the world of most oncology in America, and frankly, most oncology in the world, which is struggling to incorporate the new stuff because science is advancing so rapidly, I wanted my father to be treated as if this diagnosis had happened 10 years in the future rather than 10 years in the past. And so what I did, even before we had an oncologist, I worked with the primary care physician just after the diagnosis and said, what I want to do is I want to sequence everything. And even though that wasn't the standard of care for his type of cancer, what I knew is it's going to take a while to get the sequenced genome of the cancer and to get the report back and to incorporate that into the treatment. Also, when doing the first biopsy, the diagnostic biopsy, to take cells and send them to this specialized lab in Seattle where they are grown into clusters of cells. And then those cells, the patients, in this case, my father's own cells, will be treated in a laboratory with different possible combinations of drugs. And the idea is if those drugs work on living cells in the laboratory, chances are they may work well in the actual patient. And so we met the oncologist, really wonderful young oncologist at Anschutz in Denver. And what he recommended for the first step was that we do a very standard form of chemotherapy. And I double checked with friends at Harvard Medical School, and they agreed this was the first step. But it was actually really worrying because what they also said is that the prognosis starting from here is maybe 6 to 9 months of healthy living from the moment of the diagnosis based on how fast his cancer had spread. And so we did that first treatment, and he tolerated it very well, but when we did the scans, it turned out it wasn't working. And the next step was a really aggressive chemotherapy, and with all of the negative associations with chemotherapy, that had a 100% chance of knocking him on his rear and a 30% chance of helping. And just about that time, we got the information back from sequencing the cancer genome, and it turned out that he had a very rare mutation in his cancer cells that was rare for his cancer, but not so rare for other types of cancer. And so there was a drug that people with his type of cancer had rarely used. There were 30 people in all of the medical literature who, with my dad's type of cancer, with this mutation, who'd been treated with this approach, and it had helped 10 of them. So, and versus the chemotherapy, there were tens of thousands of people. And so the doctor was recommending the chemotherapy because it was known. And I said, well, I think we should actually really look at this other option, because if it's 10 out of 30, maybe it works really well. Maybe it doesn't work well at all, but I think it's worth taking that risk. And so we did it. And so I mentioned being a Kansas City Chiefs fan. And when my dad first got the diagnosis, I gave him his Chiefs hat that he's worn pretty continuously since then. That first year, I was in Dubai during the Super Bowl against the Eagles. And if there are any people from Philadelphia in the audience? All right, so you got us back. Anyway, so 2 years ago, the Super Bowl, it was the Chiefs versus the Eagles, and I was in Dubai, and I was watching on FaceTime. It was the middle of the night for me, and let me put it this way: when the Chiefs won in overtime, I was there when my father's first granddaughter was born. It was this moment of incredible joy for our family. And I was on the phone with him in FaceTime when the Chiefs won the Super Bowl 2 years ago. And one of the looks on his face was happier. Anyway, so that was really exciting. But then after that season, I thought, well, at least we have a Super Bowl victory, because that was the time when the prognosis wasn't so good. And it was soon after that Super Bowl that we decided to try this new approach. And the new approach was so successful that remission hadn't been one of the possibilities that was presented to us, that my dad was in very remission that had not even been seen in the medical literature. And as a reward for his progress, last year, my brother and I took him to the Super Bowl. And here we were. This was, obviously, it wasn't so good for the Chiefs this year, but this is us just a few minutes after the Chiefs won. The reason why I'm telling you all of this story is when we learn about technology, there are very healthy, natural fears that we feel because it's scary. These are really scary new things. But what technology is about, it's time. It's about potential. It's about having the energy to do all of the wonderful things that we do in life. So everything that I've said, let me make the exact same point in a different way. How many of you found the food that you consumed today through hunting and gathering? All right, nobody. How many of you are professional full-time farmers? None. So every single person in this room, you are living your life as a result of technology. Technology is what has given you the time to do every single thing that every person in this room has done with your entire professional life. So the question for us is not technology, yes or no. Technology is happening. Technology is connected to the evolutionary trajectory of our species. The question is, how do we best use these technologies to optimize benefits and minimize harms? But coming back to my dad's story, the other nice thing about technology, as I'll talk about in a moment, is the ability to share things. So sharing when great things happen. So this is a paper that was published by our oncologist from Anschutz last year in the Journal of GI Cancer, taking the one case of my dad and suggesting that this treatment, which we had pioneered, should now be a standard treatment, a standard first treatment for people who have my dad's same diagnosis with this same mutation. So there's a big story here. I'm starting with a small story to lead us in to the big story, and we'll get there in steps. So raise your hand if you've played around with ChatGPT. Perfect, keep it up. So raise your hand if you've heard of ChatGPT. All right, so everybody in this room has heard of ChatGPT. If you haven't, then just ask your neighbor and go home and do it. You can do it for free. When I talk to people about AI, and I say, "Are you comfortable with AI? Have you experienced AI?" They say, "Oh yeah, I've been to ChatGPT," and that is a correct answer. If you say I've played around with AI, I've been to ChatGPT, you're saying something that is technically correct. But if I ask you, how did electricity influence your life today? It's not an answerable question, because you could say, well, I guess my alarm clock that woke me up was electricity, but I'm living in a freezing place that wouldn't be livable without electricity. And I'm wearing clothes that would not be made without electricity. And I'm wearing glasses, and my haircut has electricity, and this carpet. And when you realize that we live lives that are in which electricity is entirely interwoven, it is pretty much impossible to have an experience not touched in one way or another by electricity, including up on Vail Mountain. So AI is not going to be, the story of AI is not going to be, I'm going to ChatGPT and I'm doing AI. It's going to be, I have this jacket. And what is this jacket? Well, there are raw materials, there's sewing, there's workmanship, there's accounting for the companies that were doing this, there are plastics that went into the buttons. And there's going to be AI woven into all of those things in really unsexy ways, like human resource management, all these other little things. It's not going to be, we're going to do AI. AI is going to be woven into everything else. And to even think about that story of AI, we need to take a bigger civilizational step backwards, because the big story here isn't just AI. It's not just any one technology. It's this civilizational moment. So what do I mean by that? 100 years ago, there were about 2 billion people on Earth with a roughly 15% literacy rate. So that means about 300 million people able to participate in the world of knowledge shared beyond their immediate communities. And that's a lot of people. You could do all sorts of things. You could build a whole Roman Empire with fewer numbers of literate people. You could have the whole Mongol Empire. But today, we have 8 billion people, 85% literacy rate. So that means about 7 billion people who are able to participate in the world of knowledge shared beyond their immediate community. So that's just a huge amount of human brain power. The story of technology is the story of applied human brain power. And we're connected to each other through these vast networks. And so what does that mean? It means nobody has to solve a problem that's already been solved somewhere else. Our ancestors spent a lot of their life's energy solving problems that have already been solved someplace else. That's why we learn about the Bronze Age, the Copper Age, the Iron Age happening thousands of years apart in different parts of the world. Now, every one of us, 8 billion humans, can wake up every morning and your starting point is all of human knowledge up to last night. And so it's not just more brains, we are unleashed. And then the title of my book is Superconvergence. Every technology is woven into every other technology. So 12,000 years ago was the beginning of the agricultural revolution. With the agricultural surpluses we developed through domesticating plants and then animals, we were able to live in larger communities. When our communities got larger and more complex, we needed a system for keeping tabs on everybody and making sure people were paying taxes. And so that's why we developed these writing systems. And if I just press 2 buttons on this computer to show you the source code, the computer language that is animating this and animating my voice, what you would see is the binary ones and zeros, which are we call them Arabic numbers. They're really Hindu numbers. And then for the computer codes, you'd see the Latin letters, which are really Phoenician letters. So these ancient writing codes are part of our computer codes. And with the computer revolution, we can have the machine learning revolution and then the AI revolution. And now we're using the tools of AI to interrogate living systems, like how a plant diffuses nutrients through a leaf, and using those models to create better computer chips using evolved designs that are making everything faster, giving us better AI tools to interrogate the world around us, AI tools to write computer code that makes AI systems even better. And so the real point here is acceleration. And that's why I also write science fiction in addition to my nonfiction, because to overcome the evolved, built-in conservatism of our brains, the practical thinking that was massively rewarded when our ancestors lived in the savannah, we have to force ourselves to think in many ways like science fiction writers, because the future, as it unfolds, will feel more and more like science fiction. I'm just going to give you an example of one company over the last 9 years, a company called Google DeepMind. In 2016, they developed an algorithm called AlphaGo, which basically took the digitized games of Go played by human masters. Go is, if you saw it and you didn't have the background, you think it looks like Chinese checkers. But the sophistication of the game is way beyond chess, meaning the possible moves that you can make each time is so far beyond chess that people thought it would be many decades before AI systems could beat the best humans at Go. In 2016, this algorithm defeated the world champion at the time, Lee Sedol. 2017, DeepMind created a new algorithm which they didn't feed any games of Go. What they did is they fed it the rules, simple rules of the game, and they gave it a reward mechanism to say you're going to start playing against yourself. If you make a move that increases your odds of victory, you get a positive reinforcement, and increases your odds of loss, a negative reinforcement. So it started playing against itself, and in the beginning, it was obviously terrible, and it got a little better and a little better. How long do you think it took before this algorithm became the greatest Go player in history by defeating AlphaGo from the year before? Close. 3 days. It took 9 hours with no information about chess to become the greatest chess player in all of history. So that was 2017. 2018, the same company said, well, we're not in the business of playing games, we're in the business of solving problems. And one of the most complex, most challenging problems in biology had been predicting the shapes of proteins. So if you sequence a protein, and proteins are the building blocks of life, and they're made up of amino acids. If you sequence a protein, you get a string of letters. But it's not that useful because the function of a protein is determined by both the order of the letters and the shape of the protein. And so the idea is if you can predict the shapes from the strings of letters, it opens up unlimited opportunities to do new things in medicine, in advanced materials, all across just every domain of human activity. So they created this algorithm, kind of like AlphaGo, which was then the learning was they had 150,000 proteins that had been characterized by humans since the 1950s, when we started to have these kinds of preliminary abilities. And even then, less than a decade ago, it would take somewhere between 1 and 10 years to characterize a single protein. There are 215 million proteins known to science. The average time was about 3 years, so people did PhDs, postdocs, just to characterize a single protein. So if you to do all of them would have taken 645 million years. So they had this first one, they entered in this 2018 into a competition where they would give these teams these strings of letters and ask them to predict the shapes of the proteins. And these are ones that humans had already characterized the old-fashioned way of crystallizing the proteins and then bombarding them with X-rays and taking pictures of those X-rays. That's why it took so long. So this team came in a disappointing 20th place. They took a step back and they used many of the same algorithms that they used to train AlphaZero, the algorithm that had defeated AlphaGo. And then they came back in 2020 and won so completely that Nature magazine in 2020 declared that the challenge, the grand challenge of predicting protein shapes had been solved. So that was a really big deal. In 2021, they released the predicted shapes of 350,000 proteins, all of the proteins in the human body. So 350,000 times 3 years, a million years thrown back into the pot where some of the smartest humans in the world could just do other stuff. Rather than spending all that million years characterizing a protein, you could spend the million years thinking, if we have a characterized protein, what can we do with it? The next year, they came back and they released 215 million predictions, a database. So now, no humans need to do this. So it's 645 million years thrown back into the pot for human innovation. And now, just last year, two important things happened. One, they released this new algorithm called AlphaFold 3, which can predict the interactions of proteins, DNAs, and RNAs, which is certainly very relevant to us. And this team won the Nobel Prize in Physics. And it's a really important story that last year, the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to people who were not physicists. They were computer scientists. And the Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded to people who were not chemists. They were computer science. When I talk about Superconvergence, the title of my book, it's that all of these pieces are coming together. We have these new ways of understanding and manipulating these systems around us. And again, as I said in the beginning, whether it's engineering novel intelligence, that's why I don't really like the AI, I don't like artificial intelligence. I don't think that's what we're creating. I think we're creating alternate intelligence. We're not creating smart humans, we are creating smart machines. I think a better title for what we're creating is machine intelligence, or maybe machine super intelligence. And so with this story, this is just one company. There are thousands of companies, and there are companies in the United States, and I think many of you maybe have heard of DeepSeek over the last month, and it turned out that China has companies that are doing incredible things. So it's about speed, it's about acceleration, it's about scope, and it's a really significant story for us. Maybe last year you heard of this new algorithm from OpenAI called ChatGPT 4o, and you can just put it on your phone, this algorithm, and you can just put the phone in front of you, and I can say, hey, I'm speaking to Vail Symposium today. This is what I'm wearing. Do you think this makes sense? And maybe he'll have a follow-up question. Or I can write something on a whiteboard and say, I'm really struggling with this mathematical equation. Do you have any ideas? And so we're starting to see a much stronger interaction of humans and these kinds of machines. And in many ways, the machines are developing sense organs. And of course, we have a metaphor in our collective subconscious for an inanimate object that starts to get different sense organs. Of course, it's Mr. Potato Head. So we are at the Mr. Potato Head phase of these superconverging revolutions, where we have thought of AIs as these things that exist on screens. And all of these systems, not just AI, they are coming out into the world. They're coming out of that space and into the spaces in which we live. So increasingly, over the coming year, you will hear words which are called agentic AI, which basically means AIs acting as your agents with more and more autonomy, meaning your AI will just do things for you once it gets to know what you want. Maybe it's planning vacations or ordering your food or arranging babysitting. And in the beginning, like with any child, you will oversee those activities. But increasingly, with some kind of supervision or not, these AI systems will be physically interacting with us. You'll hear the word multimodal, and what multimodal means is just this same point. It's not what's happening just in screen. It's these systems will live in multiple domains, whether it's audio or video. And so you're already seeing these programs that are generating these deep fakes that I'm sure you're all seeing all over your social media feeds. We're going to be living in this hybrid world, and I've written about this quite a bit, where it is not that we have the real world and the virtual world. It's that we have the physical world and the virtual world, and both of them are components of the real world. Our virtual world will be as real in many ways as our physical world, and when you kind of look around, just look at the news. That is I think what we're seeing. And so the rubber hits the road in the applications of these technologies, not just in the abstract technologies themselves. So one of the most important that I've already talked about is healthcare, where these technologies will move us from our world of generalized healthcare based on population averages, which is, just giving the case of my dad, the traditional way you would go and say, this is your diagnosis, we're going to start you on this. If this doesn't work, we'll do that. And if that doesn't work, we'll do the third thing. And that's the trial and error. And we've had to do trial and error because our understanding even today of biology is so small relative to the full complexity of biology. But now we're moving towards our world of personalized, I'm sure you're all familiar with it, personalized or precision healthcare, based on an understanding of each person's individual biology. And so just like my dad, the question was not, is my dad a human being with this diagnosis? We had to drill deeper, and we had to say, what is the specifics, my dad's specific cancer? And we had down to a molecular level, and it turned out that the story of my dad's cancer wasn't really a story of his type of cancer. It was that this mutation had existed in other cancers. So 10 years ago, we just said, oh, it's lung cancer. Here's how we treat lung cancer. Now that is not really entirely relevant. It's we're going to understand your specific cancer, and we're going to treat you as an individual based on an understanding of that one cancer. And as we have that, and as we build these massive data sets, we're going to have a much greater capacity to manipulate these biological systems in humans or otherwise. And so certainly new fields of medicine. This woman is Victoria Gray, who's one of the first people cured of sickle cell disease. And basically they took out her own cells and they turned on her ability to produce hemoglobin, which humans have. We have two ways of producing hemoglobin. One when before we're born, and one after we're born. And so they took out her cells and turned on the before you're born hemoglobin production, fetal hemoglobin, and then put those stem cells back in her body, and they proliferated. and now she's cured. These new fields of xenotransplantation, where we have the first patients who are getting pig hearts and kidneys that have been genetically altered to make it so that our bodies don't reject them and they don't carry the porcine viruses that have been deadly with these kinds of transplantations. That's already happening. The whole new field of pharmacogenomics, where before you take a medicine, we do an analysis of your genetics, your biology, to say, based on your individual biology, this is what we think is going to be best for you. And so as we have this transition from generalized to precision, as we collect these massive pools of data, and the formula across the board is the more and better and higher quality data we have, the more computing power we have, and the stronger our algorithms, the more we're going to be able to understand and manipulate complex systems. And certainly in the case of healthcare, that is going to move us this next jump from precision to predictive and preventive. And predictive and preventive is what you're all doing right now by living in Vail, by living the lifestyles that you have. It's not that we're going to have, greater surgeries, and although we will, it's that we're going to understand how our biology is functioning. And rather than living in our world of healthcare, which is really sick care, symptom-based sick care, if you have a genetic disorder that shows up when you're 70, that's 70 years and 9 months where you've been sitting with that thing and it's been growing. So we're going to get ahead of that curve. And the interventions may be just really simple things, diet, exercise, in some cases, bigger things. So we're going to transition. I'm actually, just from here, I'm flying to Palm Beach on Saturday, and I'm speaking to a big convention of boards of national healthcare systems. And I'm going to talk about, these are all of these transitions that are happening in healthcare, from generalized to personalized, I mentioned, episodic to continuous, sick care to healthcare, fee-for-service to incentive for outcomes, physical plus virtual, opaque to user-friendly, atomized data, interoperable data, and most importantly, human to human plus AI. Our future is not humans alone, it's not machines alone, it's humans plus machines working together. But this isn't just a story about humans or human health. As I said before, the reason why there can be so many of us here is because we've revolutionized agriculture. That's how we've quadrupled the number of humans over the last century. We've done it with these wonderful things that are just great, of fertilizer, special types of seeds that are more productive, irrigation, all of these kinds of things that are great, but they come at a cost. And now we have 8 billion people going to a world of 10 billion. If we just scale up, right now half of all arable land in the world is used for agriculture. If we just scale this up, not just for these 2 billion more people, but even more of them who want to live lives like ours and have diets like ours, we're going to have to destroy all the wild spaces in the world. And we're not going to do that. The right answer is for everyone to become a vegetarian. We're probably not going to do that anytime soon. So how do we get the foods that we want in a sustainable way? And it turns out that these tools of the biotechnology revolution are a very important story of how we're going to do that. I know that because this is Colorado, there are some people who will say, well, I don't eat GMO crops, and that certainly is your prerogative. But I will say, after 50 years of studies, there's never been a single study that has ever shown that consuming GMO crops is less healthy for humans than non-GMO crops. There's no evidence of that. There are other reasons maybe to be concerned about GMO crops. But we have to have these massive increases in productivity. We have to grow crops in dry parts of the world around the equator where most people live. We are going to have to grow crops in river valleys, which are now going to be salinated because of changing sea levels associated with global warming. And these technologies will be part of how we do it. And the good news is agriculture is one of the most aggressive forms of biotechnology in all of human history. So the thing that we're manipulating is not unadorned nature. It is just biotechnology. And there are all sorts of ways that I write about in the book that we're going to do that in plant agriculture. But of our plant agriculture, about 75% of it actually supports animal agriculture, and whether it's crops being fed to animals or grazing lands for animals. And most of that is not old McDonald's farm, it's industrial animal agriculture. And again, so if you have a cow, you have to feed that cow 30 calories of plant to get 1 calorie of meat. So it's highly, highly inefficient. Again, the best answer is for us all to become vegetarians, but for cultural and reasons, lots of other reasons, I'm not a vegetarian. And so how do, I mean, maybe I should be, because it's the right answer, but it's an important point, is that we're not going to solve any of these problems by getting people to do things that we don't want to do, especially when these are things that we've done for all of life. And so if people say, we can solve climate change, let's all live in teepees, it's true, but we're just not going to do it. It's not the history of our species. The history of our species is we want these things. And the trick of it is, how can we have these things without the associated costs? I mean, right now, we live in a world based on industrialization, as I was saying before. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have food, healthy, nutritious food for everybody. It doesn't mean we shouldn't have animal products for everybody. But what if we could have these same animal products and not have to kill the 90 billion land animals that we kill every year? And what if we could do it with much less water and much less land and much less energy and a much lower environmental footprint? And it turns out we can. And we're in the early stages, and we'll see if it can go to scale at an appropriate cost, of this new field of cell-cultivated animal products, cell-cultured or cell-cultivated. And basically what you do is you find the healthiest animal you can find. Take a cow, you extract the stem cells, you expand those cells in a laboratory, further expand those cells in an industrial bioreactor, and now you have grown milks and meats and other products that are biologically identical to the ones that come from animals, or they could even be better. You could replace the unhealthy saturated fats in certain animals with much healthier omega-3s or whatever. And so if we can do that, I think it's in my view, pretty exciting. So in the early stages, the first cell-cultured hamburger was created in the Netherlands in 2013 at a cost of $325,000. Now it's $10. And so the cost is going down. Our animal agriculture is highly subsidized. And so can we get to scale? I don't know the answer, but it's pretty exciting. I mean, there's so many applications. I go through them at some length in the book. This is one of my favorites. This is spider silk. Spider silk, pound for pound, it's stronger than Kevlar. It's stretchier than our stretchiest elastics. You can use it in all our bodies, don't reject it. So it can be used in all kinds of medical applications. It can be used for all kinds of fiber optics. And so you say, why don't you just get a bunch of spiders like we do with silkworms and just grow a bunch of spider silk? But you can't, because spiders are cannibals. And so how do we do it? This whole new field. One is just synthetically creating, using the chemical formula of the spider silk, by you sequence the spider silk and recreate it. But we're also genetically altering E. coli bacteria so that it produces spider silk. Genetically engineering silkworms so that they don't produce silkworm silk, but instead they produce spider silk. And even genetically altered goats who produce silkworm proteins in their milk. Again, it's just another way of doing things, and we have to recognize that the things that we are doing all come from something. Whether the wool is coming from sheep, a lot of us have plastics in one way or another in our clothes, and those are petroleum products. So maybe there's a new model, rather than digging things up or cutting them down, to growing them. And that applies to energy, where the first generation of biofuels came from, like ethanol, from the most digestible parts of plants. And because it was just easiest to extract sugars, that's why also we eat those same plants. But now this next generation is taking parts of plants that we wouldn't eat, or some that we would throw away, or maybe 50-mile islands of sargassum seaweed floating in the Gulf of Mexico as a result of the outflows of fertilizer, and using that as seed stock to create biofuels and bioplastics. And the last one, examples, although I could just keep going on, is data storage. We feel like we're much smarter than our ancestors 10 or 20,000 years ago, but our brains are exactly the same as theirs. The reason why we're leading the lives we lead, and they led the lives that they led without all the options that we have, is not that any one of us are smarter than they are, it's that we are beneficiaries of our collective cultural inheritance. And you may think that all of this data is stored in the cloud, and the cloud is up there, but the cloud is in these data centers that are growing with extreme rapidity, requiring so much energy that we're now basically booting up the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant so that it can be used to support data centers. But we have a more efficient way of storing data. When Carl Benz invented the car in the 1880s, he had in his workshop in Germany, he had a horse carriage. And when he would say, like, how does the wheel work? He'd look at the horse carriage. Oh yeah, that's how we've developed the horse carriage. Imagine if he had a modern Porsche parked in his workshop. And every time he said, well, how are we going to solve that problem? Just go and look at the Porsche. We have that Porsche for data storage. We are the greatest data storage mechanism in history. That's what DNA is. DNA, every cell in your body contains the 3.8 billion year continuous history of life on Earth. DNA is 1 million times denser than silicon. In the right conditions, it can store data reliably for millions, or in our case, billions of years. And so there's a whole new field of DNA data storage. Is it ready to replace silicon-based chips and data storage? No. But all of these things, it's the beginning of a revolution with profound implications. And as exciting as all of this is, there is one problem, and it's got a name we can say in one word, and it starts with an H, and it ends with an umans. Humans. We are complex. It's not like you could say, hey, here's a superpower. Here's the great stuff that could be done with this superpower. Go and make that great stuff happen. Because the way that we work is we're competitive. We're different from each other. We have different motivations. We compete with each other. And this drives a lot of things. Darwin called this random mutation and natural selection. We call it diversity and competition. And so this diversity is pushing forward all these wonderful things that I've just talked about, and it's pushing forward all of the negative things. And there are very, very real potential dangers. As a matter of fact, the last time when I was here speaking for Vail Symposium, I was talking about my last book, Hacking Darwin, which is on the future of human genetic engineering. And when that book actually, it was in production, and I called my publisher in late 2018, and I said, I've got bad news and good news. And the bad news is that this is a book about the future of human genetic engineering, and the first genome-edited CRISPR babies were just born in China, and I can't have this book come out and not mention that. So we have to pull it out of production. The good news is that in the book, I predicted that this was going to happen. I predicted it was going to happen in China soon, and I explained why. And I had a list of 5 specific genes, and I said, I think that one of the first genome-edited humans will have one of these 5 genes manipulated, and the first CRISPR babies of the 3 that now exist were all engineered in that exact precise way that I had predicted. So the good news is, for the hardback version, we just need to add a few short paragraphs, and then we'll do more in the paperback. And then I was part of, as was mentioned in my introduction, of the WHO, World Health Organization Expert Committee on Human Genome Editing, trying to say, well, what will the rules of the road be? Should the rules of the road be for one of the most powerful technologies in all of history? And so we came up with great recommendations, but the problem is, at the end of the day, where do you give it? If you give it to the WHO, as you know, the United States has just withdrawn from the WHO. The WHO is doing mass firings of people because of the budget. So we don't have a framework for solving these problems. As some of you know, I was deeply involved in the issue of COVID-19. I'm certainly vaccinated. I'm a huge believer in vaccines. I think the COVID mRNA vaccines are among the most successful vaccines in all of human history, which doesn't make them or any other medical or health intervention perfect. But at the same time, in early 2020, just looking at the available evidence, I thought there was a disparity between the data, what I was reading from the data, and what I was reading in the news. And the news was saying it came from the Huanan seafood market in Wuhan. And the data that I was seeing was suggesting that it was very likely it came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, or one of the Wuhan labs. And this, I was the lead witness in the congressional hearings on COVID-19 origins. So what's the story of both of these, the CRISPR babies and COVID-19? In both of them, there's a really wonderful positive story. I mean, the CRISPR babies story in China ended up terribly, but the idea that we could change a future child from 3 years of suffering followed by death to 90 or 100 years of a full life with a relatively small intervention at the earliest point of life, that's potentially a wonderful story, even though it went terribly wrong in the case of the CRISPR babies. All of these technologies that we can create these amazing vaccines, and that COVID-19 most likely, in my view, stems from an accident of well-intentioned scientists trying to secretly develop a pan-coronavirus vaccine in Wuhan, and things went wrong, and it took a while to figure this out. So all of these technologies have upsides and downsides. And that leads back to where I started. So what's the difference between having the good story realized and the bad story realized? Because both of them are very real possibilities. And that comes back to the point that I was making about responsibility. In the book, in the final chapter, I have a pyramid of all of the levels that we need to have intervention. And some people might say, well, let's just sit back and let the government do it. And certainly not under the Biden administration, certainly not under the Trump administration. Our governments, no governments, are capable of managing all of this alone. And the pyramid that I have has at the base what we are doing today: individual education, engagement, and empowerment, starting with individuals. Then what do individuals do with that knowledge? Well, engaging with each other, with your communities, with your elected officials. What happens at the regional level, the national level, the international level, the global level? Because the basic story of this moment on Earth is that we have reached a point where our one species has the ability to change things on a planetary scale. That's the story of climate change. It's the story of runaway technology. It's the story of proliferating nuclear weapons. It's the story of pandemics, is that our species now has this global reach. And we don't have a politics to match. We don't have a problem-solving capacity as humans. And until that happens, we are in grave danger. I know there are people in this room who have different political backgrounds, orientations, persuasions. All are welcome. Nobody has a monopoly on the truth. But the one thing that I can tell you, as I said in the beginning, for sure, that is, if all we focus on is pressing the gas, and we don't try to find out what's the right balance between the gas and the brakes, if we don't think about advancing these technologies and doing everything possible to ensure they can be used as responsibly as possible, if we don't do that, this wonderful story is certainly going to end in disaster. And another way of thinking about that is that we are all individually, whatever we're doing, whoever we are all individual dots in the Seurat painting. And our job is not just to be a great dot, but to say, I'm a great dot and I have a relationship to this whole painting. That is the work. That's why getting together in a community like this isn't just entertainment. It's the beginning of a process of being the best dot you and we all can be. And so just three very quick, it scares people when I say, well, here's ways of kind of going forward for whatever we're doing to kind of think about how do we become the best dot. One, as I mentioned before, this is not a story of humans alone. I'll use the case of medicine. X years from now, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 20, maybe it's 5, a human physician acting alone, not in conjunction with an AI system, will be committing malpractice. And I also think in that same time frame, a machine system doing the same without human judgment and involvement will also be committing malpractice. So I hate it when I hear people say that humans are the new Neanderthals. We have so many magic tricks up our sleeves. We are not just some kind of simple intelligence walking all around on stilts. We are these very complex, evolved beings with so many different ways of knowing. So I hate it when people devalue humans, but we've co-evolved with our technology. We will continue to co-evolve with our technology. And that's how we really need to think about it. And so how do we do it? Well, for everything that we're doing, let's just say you have some job. Your job isn't one thing. If you break it down, you could break it down into 10 subtasks, whatever it is. And for each one of those things, you could say, 10 years from now, will this subtask be more likely carried out by humans alone, machines alone, or a hybrid? If it's humans alone, spend tons of time being the best human you can be. Don't be a second-rate machine. Be a great human doing human stuff. If it's something machines will do better than humans, figure out how to get the machines to do that. It's the same point of none of you are farmers, because you collectively said, I don't want to be a farmer. I'm going to get a machine that is going to take my place. So don't be a great human. Don't be a bad machine. And if it's a hybrid, we need to start figuring out how to be great hybrids. Second thing, never stop learning. You know that because you're here, but we all have the stuff that we know we need to know. I see these young, are you a student at Northwestern? That's awesome. So, all right, so you have young student here going to Northwestern, and whatever you study, you're going to know, I need to know what do you want to do? Chemical. All right, so to be a chemical engineer, I need to know chemical engineering stuff. But just like I said about the Nobel Prizes in chemistry and physics going to non-chemists and non-physics, if you don't really spend a lot of time learning the adjacent stuff, you're not going to be able to be a great chemical engineer. And that applies for everybody. And so how do you know what adjacent stuff is important to you? This is like your heart is beating over here. How do you know what is the adjacent stuff that's important to you? Just look at the stuff in front of you and something is going to seem different. You're going to see a little weak signal, something, hey, that's weird. Why is this that way? Something I've seen one way for years, now it looks a little bit different. Just follow your curiosity, follow that why, and keep following your whys, and that will take you to what you need to know. And the third thing is core values. I speak to a lot of companies and industry associations. What I tell them is, if you are having a conversation about all this stuff, and the question you ask is, how do I use this technology? You have failed in your first step. There is no way you can get where you need to go if the first question you ask is, how do I use this technology? The first question you ask, whoever you are, is, who am I? What do I stand for? And what am I trying to achieve? And of the mix of capabilities available to me, what is the optimal mix to achieve the goals that I want to achieve? This is not a conversation about technology. This is ultimately a conversation about human aspirations, values, and goals. And if we forget that, we're just going to have a terrible outcome that we will dehumanize ourselves with no upside. And final point that I will say is, when we talk about technology, people feel like technology is other. But just remember, technology is us. This technology, it is the reward of our collective knowledge, our collective brain power, our collective progress as people and people who are part of something bigger than ourselves. And so if we want to realize this incredibly wonderful potential dream, every single person needs to take a lead. So thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jaime Metzl.
What are you reading?
Oh, it's a great question. So
That was a great question.
I was just telling when I met with people before, I just finished a few days ago, the most wonderful biography of Ralph Waldo Emerson that just came out. And it was this beautiful author who was writing about Emerson. And I think everybody, I hope, knows who Ralph Waldo Emerson is, but a great transcendentalist philosopher. And he was talking about his own life. And then I got to the end of the book, and it turned out that his father was struggling with health issues while he was writing the book. And the book itself was his effort to balance idealism and just the hard realities of the world. The problem is I read on a Kindle, so I can never remember the titles or the authors of the book because I see it once and I never see it again. And then the other night, I mean, this is not a way to live, but it's interesting to me. The other night, I just started this new book about the past, present, and future of chickens. And it sounds really boring, but it's so fascinating. Chickens are the closest living relatives to what animal that no longer, to T-Rexes. So chickens are the closest living relatives to T-Rexes. And the way that we've manipulated a broiler chicken, and I write about this in my own book, a broiler chicken today is 5 times bigger than the average broiler chicken in the 1950s. And when I talk in my last book, I talk about how we can goose human evolution. We've taken wild chickens that lay 1 egg a month and turn them into domesticated chickens who can lay one egg a day. So there's a lot of movement in biology because we're all humans. Our parents were humans. Our kids are humans. We don't see it, but no species has ever really seen evolution in real time. Sometimes it happens really quickly when we look at what we've done to all of our domesticated animals, and it gives a sense of what's possible for us. So that's just what I'm reading now. But coming back to what I said before about reading broadly, I think it's really important because human creativity, thinking about problem solving, we have to know specific stuff in our fields. But if we're too narrow, we aren't going to do what my middle thing is learn about adjacent things. And when you figure out what is special about humans, it is that creativity. It is that expansion. So great question. Thank you.
Yeah, Jamie, thank you. We live in a world now which is changing so quickly, and we all have pieces of technology that are all part of us, like my hearing aid, my glasses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I like what you say about AI as a partner of humans going forward.
Yes.
Could you comment on what seems to be a frantic race to artificial general intelligence and somehow the idea that we would have computers that are so far advanced above us that they're, super intelligence and we don't even know what consciousness is. So how do we know how to relate to those?
It's a great question. So the question is about artificial general intelligence, and I had a hint of my views in my main remarks. I don't believe artificial general intelligence is a thing because I think that what we are creating is not artificial intelligence. But having said that, we are moving toward incredible machine super intelligence. If you are the defense minister of Ukraine right now, and you are not investing everything you can in autonomous killer robots that are as free as possible from human control, you are committing treason against your country. It just is. So we're in this world. In the United States, we had our CHIPS Act because we thought we had such a head start in AI. And so we thought, well, if we have a CHIPS Act and we prevent China from getting our advanced chips. But the problem that we had in the United States was Google came up with the framework for these new AI systems. But they didn't release their models because they thought these things can't be controlled and the science isn't there. And then there was this upstart company, OpenAI, and they had nothing to lose. So they very quickly released their models, even though they had started as a not-for-profit whose goal was to prevent an AI arms race. So they launched an AI arms race. And then Meta, Facebook, who had invested billions in this and was so far behind, they said, we're going to lose our company. So they used the Google model. When Google realized they were so far behind Apple in the operating system for iPhones, they developed Android, which they open sourced. And that was their strategy of going to scale. So that's what Meta did in order to compete with OpenAI. And then the Chinese companies took Meta's open source and they developed their algorithms with some added stuff. And now the Trump administration on its first day in office rescinded the Biden executive orders that were designed to put some restrictions and to balance progress and safety. And now those have now all been removed. And just last week, we had the AI summit in Paris, where the United States said, we're no longer in the business of controls, we are in the business of progress. And then France said, all right, well, I guess we're going to do that too. So that's the point that I was making so we are racing forward to something that will have profound implications for better and for worse. We don't really understand it, and we don't yet have a mechanism for balancing our very, I think, healthy desire to enhance these machines. But if we do it, if we don't think about governance as integrated with everything else, every victory will ultimately be a Pyrrhic one.
You had talked about humans and AI sort of working together in concert. At some point, though, what's the real value add of the human being? In other words, the questions, and I don't mean it to sound that drastic, but at some point, the AI will have asked all the questions that a human can come up with. It will have gone through all the possible solutions. And so at what point are we not just sort of test subjects to make the AI even smarter?
It's a great question, and many people are asking it. Again, I referenced, so you won't be surprised at my response based on what I just said, but I believe that humans aren't just a narrow intelligence. As a matter of fact, the book that I'm writing now, I've written 3 novels, and I'm now writing another novel trying to explore that, of like, what does it mean when humans have robotic AIs who can do things that we really value differently and maybe better than we do. In this case, it's composing and performing music. But I believe that humans have always asked that question. If we're not hunter-gatherers, what will we do? If we're not farmers, what will we do? And then we just have a lot of the AI's systems right now. They are doing one kind of category of things. They're going to be able to study, and they are already studying, our entire written corpus as humans. And now I mentioned multimodal in my talks, I for sure, and I write about this in my new book, I think there are going to be some of us who are going to volunteer to be model humans, is what I talk about in my novel, where you just have sensors all over your body and you're just living your life, but you're producing all of the data about how you're living, how you're interacting with other people, and that's a training set for AIs. So AIs are going to, and not just AIs plus robotics, plus fancier, better computer chips are going to do a whole lot of things. But we humans can do so many different things, so many varied things, and it's not going to be AIs are better than us or AIs are worse than us. It's going to be, and it's not even going to be function by function, it's going to be subtask by subtask. And there are certain things that I think we're going to find that we do way better than AIs, and certain things that they do way better than us. And I think we're going to be surprised about what fits in each category. So I could be totally wrong, because this is just, nobody has an answer to that question. But I, for one, this is why I think of myself as a humanist. I think there's a lot of stuff that we don't appreciate, and we don't even know how to know. And so, going back to the healthcare setting, we've been going back and forth to the hospital in Denver, and there's different people who are doing different functions. The radiologists are highly valued. Some of the PAs or the assistants or the people who are just coming and taking blood pressure are less valued and certainly less financially compensated. But there's some really wonderful people who are doing very meaningful things. And we may have to shift how we value, how we compensate. If you were to tell your ancestors, if your great-great-great-grandparents said, well, what do you do? And you'd be so proud. It's like, I'm the commissioner of the National Football League. And they would say, what? And you say, oh, it's this thing. And you explain it to me, like a bunch of people, and you're going down a field and you throw a ball. And it's like, oh, is that more associated with hunting or gathering? And so it's just, we've invented all of these things. And so if we have AIs, just like we have combines that are helping us with farming, and we've invented all these other things, and we have very meaningful lives. So I do think we have a lot of tricks up our sleeve. I could just as easily be wrong.
From our online audience,
Yes.
have we humans created the smartest possible society?
No. Obviously, would we have these? Probably we have not. And I don't think we can. I mean, I just think that anybody who has sold that this was achievable has sold. I mean, my PhD dissertation was on the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. That was their plan. I mean, the people who end up being the worst genocidal, maniacal murderers are always the people who have this single plan that is going to deliver us into perfection. I'm more of a follower of Isaiah Berlin. Humans are so different. The name of the game is to have systems and structures that can help us work together and find compromise. That's why I'm concerned about what's happening in the United States now. We certainly have big problems, but it is not the case. It was not the case in any country before, and it will not be the case here, that just say, well, let's break the system and empower a small group of unelected people just to fix it. That always sounds good, but it never works. And the reason it doesn't work is that for a society to function of empowered, educated people like us, we need to be giving our best to society. That's the name of the game. We should be saying, well, all of these people who are getting terrible education or terrible health, it sucks for them, but it sucks for us. This is a tax on us. And so there is no perfect society, but there is a society that's always trying to be better. And I think that's got to be the goal.
To your left.
Yeah.
So my wife and I have embraced stem cell treatment. And I'm curious how you take this story that you've told in terms of the evolution of using stem cell treatment to create better outcomes. It's almost like stem cell progress today is like the Bomar brain. So what's the future of it?
Yeah. So I have mixed views on stem cell treatments. Certainly, there's a lot of hype and hope that is going into the stem cell industry. And lots of people are going to the Caribbean, to Central Asia, to get all kinds of untested treatments that I believe are potentially extremely dangerous. And then on the other side of the end of the spectrum, there are small-scale stem cell treatments like my brother, who's a sports medicine doctor in New York, does with these PRP shots, which are relatively benign. And there's kind of everything in between there. So I just have a lot of caution. I mean, I had the slide here of the woman who was cured of her sickle cell disease. And essentially that was a stem cell because they took out her cells, engineered the stem cells and put them back. But for all of these interventions, I'm actually pretty conservative. In the worlds that I exist, there are lots of people who are these biohackers. As a matter of fact, I was featured in Biohackers magazine. But I don't want to be the first person doing something that's untested because maybe you guys have heard of Liz Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize for creating our understanding of telomeres, these caps at the end of our chromosomes. And the idea was they get shorter as you age. So why don't you take this enzyme telomerase that makes them longer? And it seemed like a good idea. But as I said before, our bodies represent almost 4 billion years of evolutionary trade-offs. And it turned out when people took this telomerase, it was actually highly carcinogenic. So I don't want to be the first person. I don't do a lot of these aggressive interventions myself. I exercise an hour a day and I eat the rainbow and I do kind of blue zone stuff. But nothing wrong with people who are, and for sure, for all of us, life is a one-way ticket. And if we have things and we want to take the more unknown something is, the greater the risk. But I just told you the story with my dad where I felt it was a risk worth taking. So my view is like the anti-aging stem cell treatments, I would not do myself, but I know a lot of people who do them.
So I know you spoke quite objectively about gene editing, but I was pretty interested about what do you think we could do to sort of control the ethics of gene editing, and then also what do you think is the highest yield area for gene editing?
Yeah. So for what we can do, and I'll say human gene editing, so there's two areas. One is called somatic, which means it's non-heritable. And that is much less controversial. And so a lot of these gene therapies, there are thousands of clinical trials for gene therapies right now. And I think that we should push them forward as quickly as possible and just make sure they're well regulated and that they go through all of the processes, although we're certainly having problems with our regulatory infrastructure here in the United States. For the issue of heritable genome editing, as I talked about, I was a member, as I said before, of this WHO expert committee on human genome editing. We came up with a whole framework, and the basic idea is that we should be extremely cautious now, and that's why I think the first 3 applications in China, in my view, represented Nuremberg-style human experimentation. But I also think that in the future, it will be highly ethical to engineer pre-implanted human embryos with, and I mentioned one of the examples in my remarks. In terms of the greatest yield, I actually think it will be outside of human health in these other areas that I've described, where our risk tolerance is much greater, and where we are manipulating already manipulated systems. So manipulating agriculture, both plant and animal agriculture, is manipulating highly manipulated systems. So we are technologically modifying revolutionary technologies. So I think that in your work, as you do, I think you're going to see it's what E.O. Wilson called consilience, is that all of these fields are blending into each other. I mean, we have there's just one nature. Nature doesn't have biology and physics and chemistry. Those are just shorthands that we have come up with because our minds need that kind of classification.
We have time for one more. I saw a hand in the back. I'm coming. This is how I get my steps.
That's hustle.
Oh, James, you're so sweet. My question is, you said that we're still working with the same brain.
Yes.
We're just alongside technology. And so then you're talking about these amazing medical treatments that are going to allow us to live for a long, long time. And how are we going to grow enough food, and how are we going to have enough space? And so I'm kind of giving a background to what's going to seem like a morbid question.
Yeah.
But the prime directive of the brain is to procreate and to create more humans. And so what are we going to do? Are we actually going to come to a point where we have to biohack that out of us? And then what does human society look like when it's not centered around family?
Yeah, all we have to, it's a great question. There's 2 things. Certainly, I'll break it into 2 parts. One is, which I didn't talk about here in my last book, Hacking Darwin. I have a lot about human life extension. I give a lot of keynotes to these conferences on the science of human life extension. And so while certainly there's a lot of basic science and a lot of podcasts about extending human life, the actual applied science isn't that great. But if we want to increase average human lifespan, as we've been doing now for more, certainly for hundreds of years, we have an easy way to do that because we have so many people in the world who are not living to our average lifespan. It's the most vulnerable people in the world. So if we want to increase average lifespan, we know how to do it. It's through healthcare and diet and exercise and governance and all of those things that we benefit from. In terms of getting more people, as I said, we're moving toward 10 billion. But as we educate more people, as societies become wealthier and more educated, actually the procreation numbers drop by themselves. And so after we peak at 10 billion, the estimates are now that in the decades after that, as we're seeing in places like China and Korea and Japan, those numbers are going to go down. So I don't think we need to, and we shouldn't do it. I mean, that drive to procreate gives humans a lot of joy, a lot of meaning, and a lot of fun. And it's part of being human. And that's what I'll connect that to what I was saying before. Our greatest task is to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be a great human, and to really invest in that? And I think that we can do it. And I think that we have tools now that will help us do it in much better ways than we've done in the past. But the question, as I said in the beginning, is can we do it wisely? And because nobody has an answer to that question on their own, in my view, the way that we're going to never solve that, but move in that direction, is to develop systems where we can come together in spite of our differences and find common ground. That's why we're here. That's why I'm so grateful to you. I'll stick around, so if you didn't get to ask your question, please come up, and thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jaime Metzl.